Okay, so in today's session, we are going to be discussing a few case studies which shows regulatory failures and regulatory successes, along with how it's enforced and what all lessons we are going to learn from the case studies. Okay, so this is an overview of what we are going to talk about. First, regulatory failures, where we'll discuss product recalls, data integrity issues. Then, regulatory successes, where we will talk about fast track approvals and how innovations are being enabled. And then we'll talk about the lessons that we've learned from both the failures and the success. Okay. In failure spotlight, we will be talking about ranitidine recall due to NMDA contamination. We'll discuss these topics in detail in the coming slides. Then we'll talk about data integrity violations, which impacted the product reliability and the trust. And last, enforcement actions, where FDA Form 483 observations and warning letters are issued to the manufacturing plant or the marketing authorization holder. So we will also talk about the FDA Form 483. In success stories, we will cover Pfizer COVID-19 emergency use authorization vaccine and regulatory fast tracking and global cooperation. In these topics, we will basically cover the rapid development and approval milestone of COVID-19 vaccine and enabling of critical innovations during pandemic and how regulatory efforts were harmonized worldwide during that time, right? So these are the topics that we will be covering in the success stories. Then talking about enforcement mechanism, how Form 483, the official FDA inspection observation, is implemented, how a warning letter or a formal notice requiring corrective action is being sent to the MAH or the manufacturing plant, and how the recall happens. So in enforcement mechanism, we will be discussing these three topics. And lastly, role of global harmonization, where we will be discussing standardizing requirements to reduce duplicative efforts, market access, how we can streamline global product approvals, and lastly, enhancing patient safety, where sharing surveillance data worldwide makes sure that the compliance is being maintained. Okay. And once all of that is done, we will discuss about post-market surveillance and how is it important. So, in post-market surveillance, we will be talking about continuous monitoring after the drug has been approved for market use, risk mitigation, and regulatory compliances. In risk mitigation, we will identify and address emerging risks, and in regulatory compliance, we will talk about supporting timely response for safety signals. Okay, let's move with the first case study, which is your emergency use authorization of Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. This is This is so far the best example of an emergency use authorization to treat a pandemic, and we will be discussing about how it came into the market and how it got emergency use authorization, under what circumstances it happened. So yes, Pfizer and BioNTech developed the first mRNA COVID-19 vaccine authorized under EUA by the US FDA in December 2020. When we talk about EUA, we are sorry, when we talk about EUA, we are mostly talking about emergency use authorization. We've talked about emergency use authorization in our previous classes when we talked about fast track approval and everything, different types of approvals that US FDA provides. But here we are specifically talking about EUA, and in EUA, what happens is uh, it's basically a regulatory mechanism which is used by the US FDA, and it allows the use of unapproved medical products or unapproved uses of approved product. Okay, so two things: either unapproved medical products that are not been approved previously in the market, uh, or unapproved uses of the approved product. say for example, a product A is being approved for use uh, and market and is marketed, but it's only used for, take for example, managing hypertension and not for any other event. So if the study shows that that product can be used to treat other ailments as well and it is not approved, then an emergency use authorization can be granted to that approved drug which has an unapproved use to be to be marketed under EUA, right? So, emergency use authorization is a regulatory mechanism used by the US FDA that allows the use of unapproved medical products or unapproved uses of approved products during a public health emergency when certain criteria are met. Okay, only under an emergency is a product granted emergency use authorization. Otherwise, normal global submissions are done or fast track approvals are done. But EUA is only granted under public health emergency and not otherwise. Okay. So, first thing, it's used in emergencies when there is a serious or life-threatening disease like COVID-19. Since we are talking about COVID-19 vaccine, we will be talking about COVID-19 only. Then EUA allows, if a drug product is getting an EUA approval, then it allows early access to vaccines and therapies before it gets a full FDA approval if evidence is shown that yes, it is providing results. Okay. So if the benefits outweigh risk, a product can get an emergency use authorization if there is a public emergency. Then there are the other factor that helps the product gets an EUA is based on the available of scientific evidence. Okay, it includes data from clinical trials, manufacturing quality information, safety monitoring plans, etc. So if there are enough scientific evidence available, then it also helps get a EUA. Then you have to understand that EUA is not your full approval. Full approval comes when all the data related to that product has been submitted. EUA is granted and a rolling data comes after it's been marketed and reach patients. So there's a rolling review that happens. Data has been submitted every day or periodically to the US FDA so that they can evaluate and review the data that is being submitted, that is being generated through patients to make sure that yes, uh, the drug is providing the results that was initially required. Okay. So it's not the same as full approval. Full approval requires more extensive long-term data and it's just temporary and valid only during the emergency. So if the emergency no longer exists, then there might be a chance that the drug would not be marketed further. But if there's an emergency, if there's enough data to get a full approval, then we can convert the EUA to a BLA in this case because it's a biologic. So an EUA can be converted into a BLA application and a full approval can be granted to that medicine. Okay. It can be revised or revoked because if new data show safety concerns or reduce benefits, then the EUA can be revoked or revised. Right. I hope that is clear what exactly is EUA. It's an emergency use authorization which is provided based on certain key points like uh, the scientific data, the benefits if they are if they outweigh the risks, and the public emergencies if there are any. Right. So moving on. When we'll talk about the EUA of Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, we will understand how a fast track regulatory success happened without compromising safety or efficacy. Okay. So let's move on with that. So regulatory submission pathways involve your EUA, full approval, and global submissions. Like we talked, EUA is submitted under US FDA's EUA pathway for rapid access, then a EUA can be converted to a full biologics license application, which happened here in the COVID-19 case. The vaccine was given EUA in 2020, and it got a full approval in 2021 because there was sufficient data to file a BLA application. Then there's global submissions, which is simultaneous filings to EMA, UK, MHRA, WHO, and SADISCO. These are regulatory bodies of different countries. So data was also submitted, or the regulatory filings were done to these agencies as well for parallel review. Okay, so the key success factors that made sure that the product gets marketed and the benefits outweigh the risks were the innovative technology, because it was the first mRNA vaccine approved for humans. And this showed that yes, rapid designs can be enabled and everything. So innovative technology was the first key success factor that helped in the success of COVID-19 vaccine. And then there was rolling review, like I told previously. FDA accepted data submissions as they became available. They did not request that the data must be submitted when the application is being submitted. They accepted the fact that yes, it's an emergency use authorization, and data can be submitted as and when they are made available to the agency for review, which is known as rolling review. Then there's global trials where because COVID-19 vaccines was globally accepted, so multiple country trials with over 40,000 participants made sure that the success rates are higher than the risks, okay, or the failure rates. And lastly, the collaboration and the manufacturing. So there was close coordination and early at-risk manufacturing investment involved in the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccine, which gave it an edge uh, to get an EUA approval. Okay, and this is a timeline snapshot. In March 2020, the vaccine design initiated. In July 2020, phase 3 trial began. In November 2020, interim data showed 95% efficacy, because of which the EUA was granted by US FDA to the COVID-19 vaccine in 2020, December 11. And then in August 23, a full BLA approval was provided based on all the data that they've submitted during the rolling review. So yes, the EOA application finally turned to a biologics license application or full approval. Okay, so this was the timeline snapshot of how COVID-19 vaccine got from EOA to BLA. And these are regulatory innovation highlighted. The first is your fast track designation, which enabled early FDA engagement. Then there's adaptive trial design, where flexible phase 3 trial structure made sure of the success of COVID-19 vaccine. And then the real time data analysis, which we've seen in the rolling review. So daily regulator review is being done for safety and efficacy data. And lastly, the global data sharing, where simultaneous submission were done, and harmonized safety standards were maintained. Okay, so fast track designation, adaptive trial design, real time data analysis, and global data sharing made sure that the success happened for for COVID-19 vaccine, right? So yes, these are the few points that needs to be remembered, like the speed and rigor. Fast approvals can maintain safety along with the transparency. Then regulatory flexibility, EU and rolling reviews enable adaptability in emergencies. Then there's global harmonization. When we do parallel submissions, it saves us time and avoid duplication of the data. And last, the trust and communication. So public confidence grows through open disclosure, because rolling review is a open disclosure of the data provided by both the patient and the clinical trial coordinator, or the person in charge in collecting the data from the patient. So yeah, the open disclosure makes sure that the patient confidence grows, and the regulatory flexibility is being provided by EOA and rolling reviews, along with speed and rigor, because of which fast track approvals happen. So yes, these are all the factors that make sure that the product is getting emergency use authorization, and a successful one, not a failed one. Okay, so emergency use authorization has been granted, but if there are any any adverse effect that has been showcased in a few months or a year, then the EUA can be revoked or revised. So when we talk about COVID-19 vaccine, none of that happened. And instead of getting revoked or revised, the COVID-19 vaccine got a full BLA approval. So this was one very good example of regulatory successes. Okay. So this slide shows you the difference between what a full approval and what an emergency use authorization is and how it is different. So in emergency use authorization, it's only used in public health emergencies, but full approval is a shared market authorization and it can be used even though there's no public health emergency. Take for example, previously 100 people, hundreds of people were suffering from COVID-19, but now only two or three cases have come up who are suffering from COVID-19. So the vaccine can be used for them as well in globally. Okay. Then EUA requires benefits to outweigh risk, while full approval is complete safety and efficacy data. Then EUA shows rapid review weeks to month, but full approvals take longer reviews month to years. And EUA is temporarily and limited use, but full approvals are permanent unless revoked. This is how Pfizer navigated regulatory complexity. They developed the mRNA platform, which was fast, skipped protein cultivation, then they submitted data modules as and when they got ready. They adopt the adaptive trials where trial design evolved with the interim data, and simultaneous filings avoided delays. Okay. Okay, now the question arises, should rolling reviews become standard? There are a lot of arguments for the rolling review and against the rolling reviews. The for one includes speeds access to life-saving therapies, enable early feedback and corrections, and reduces submission bottlenecks. While the argument against the rolling reviews were that it put pressure on the reviewers with incomplete data because the data is being submitted as and when it becomes available. It puts pressure on the reviewers with the incomplete data. It requires more regulatory resources, and the risk of data fragmentation is not standardized because data is being submitted in fragments to the regulatory body for review, so it cannot be standardized when we are talking about rolling reviews. So, what was suggested for this is that they adopt for critical therapies with clear criteria and strict timelines so that data fragmentation does not happen. And if it is happening, then there is a standardized procedure to deal with the data fragmentation as well. Okay, so yes, adopting to clinical therapies with clear criteria and strict timelines will make sure that the rolling review becomes easier for everyone without putting any pressure on the reviewers since there is a strict timelines in place with clear criteria. Now we coming to balancing speed with caution in future pandemics, sorry. So, first thing you have to make sure there's a structured emergency pathway, tiered approval tracks with exit points. Then there should be international coordination, regulatory convergence should be there to avoid any sort of duplication of data. Then advanced regulatory science where you invest in AI and real world data systems to make sure you're getting the perfect data for your for the reviewing. Then transparent communications between the clients and the stakeholders and the patients involved so that open data and frequent briefing can build trust. And last is your post approval conditionality, where mandatory studies and RMPs are important to make sure that the drug is safe for use in the long term. Okay, so this was about Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, which was a huge regulatory success. Got EUA, got fast track approval, became a BLA. So yeah, that was a very good example of regulatory success. Now moving on to the regulatory failure. When we talk about regulatory failure, it can happen due to a lot of reasons, but today we are going to discuss about ranitidine withdrawal and how it happened. It was a big regulatory failure in generic drug life cycle. So, ranitidine, as we all know, is known as Zantac and was a popular antacid approved decades ago. by regulatory bodies like the US FDA and CDSCO. Okay, so before moving with the ranitidine drug study, if you have any questions based on the regulatory success that we discussed for COVID-19 vaccine, you can pop them in the chat box and we can take them up before we talk about the regulatory failure. So, point being, the point of taking the example of taking the example of COVID-19 vaccine was to make you understand how emergency use authorization is granted and why is it very important to have emergency use authorization in place. Because approvals in general take a lot of time for reviewing and getting to the market. So, an EU is important when there is a emergency in place. Okay, so that's why COVID-19 vaccine was talked about. Um, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, and we can take that up in towards the end of the class. I'll give you a minute, and then we'll move on to the ranitidine case study, which was a huge failure in regulatory life cycle. Okay, so let's move on with the um, ranitidine withdrawal, which was a regulatory failure in generic drug life cycle. So, ranitidine, widely known as Zantac, was a popular antacid approved decades ago by regulatory bodies like the US FDA and CDSCO. Right? Generic versions were approved through ANDA application. We've all talked about ANDA. We all know what ANDA application is, how it's being submitted, what are the data that's been provided in ANDA. I hope everyone knows about that so far. So yeah, Zantac was approved. Generic versions were approved through ANDA. In 2019, the FDA detected a impurity called N-nitrosodimethylamine (NDMA), a probable human carcinogen in some ranitidine products, raising serious safety concerns. Okay, so this case highlights critical regulatory oversights and challenges in managing legacy drugs and generics, leading to widespread product withdrawals and regulatory reforms. So before they found the NDMA, imagine how frequently and how fast the Rantac was being sold and used by the patients without knowing that the NDMA is present in Rantac. Okay, it was only because of regulatory, constant rechecks and post-market surveillance that led to the finding that yes, the Zantac contains a probable human carcinogen known as NDMA, and because of that, the ranitidine was withdrew from the market. And how did it happen? Let's talk about that. So, okay, what went wrong? First thing, regulatory oversights in stability studies. So, ranitidine's molecular instability under certain storage conditions causes NDMA formation over time. You need to understand that when a product gets approval, you also have to submit stability studies which shows that yes, the product that's been stored in a certain container or closure, a certain packaging, then the product is not product is chemically compatible with the material of the container or material of the packaging. Because if they react and if there is a formation of a certain impurity or a certain substance which can act as a carcinogen, then it can be very it can affect the patient's health who's consuming it, and it is not safe to use. So stability studies should be conducted for the materials of the container and closure system that's been used for the storage of the medicine. So the first thing that we're talking about here is that NDMA formation started over time. It was not initially present in the drug product. Uh, it was a result of the storage condition which led to molecular instability causing NDMA formation over time. Neither innovator nor generic manufacturer adequately tested or disclosed this risk during ANDA submission, especially for long-term stability at higher temperatures. So, what must have caused the NDMA formation is long-term, long-term, sorry, the product was being stored for a long time under high temperatures, which led to the NDMA formation. And this, the manufacturer, the generic manufacturer, or the innovator knew about it, but did not mention the same in the stability studies when they were filing the ANDA application. So the regulatory oversight led to what was one factor that led to regulatory withdrawal. Okay. The second thing that led to the failure was inadequate post-market surveillance. So manufacturers failed to detect or report NDMA risks early. Regulators did not enforce stringent impurity testing for legacy molecule, allowing the issue to persist unnoticed. Like I said, the quick actions were not enforced. The product was not tested for impurities, etc. Everybody was in negligence, which led to inadequate post-market surveillance, which was another reason for why the regulatory sorry, for why the ranitidine was withdrew from the market. And last is your incomplete response to regulatory queries. So generic manufacturers submitted incomplete risk assessments or used non-validated methods, which regulators thought were inconsistent, leading to voluntary market withdrawal globally. Okay, so if you're not submitting the proper and adequate responses to the queries raised by the FDA or any regulatory body for that matter, then it leads to improper communication between the regulatory bodies and the manufacturer or the marketing authorization holder, leading to market withdrawal of that product either globally or locally. So these were the regulatory actions taken worldwide. In US FDA, re- uh, they requested manufacturers to withdraw all ranitidine product uh, by April 2020. In EMA, which is European Medicine Agency, all the ranitidine medicine was suspended across Europe in 2020. And in India, they were initially restricted import and later banned formulations with NDMA above limits. So in India, uh, there were only import restrictions initially, and later on, they just banned the formulations with an NDMA above limit. They were okay with the NDMA up to a certain limit or below that, but above it, it was um, it was risky. It was not healthy for the patient to consume it. So they banned formulations with NDMA above limit. But in 2020, 2021, which is again not the right decision to make because NDMA, as we talked about, is carcinogen, and all the medicines with NDMA should be prohibited from use in the market. Okay? Root cause analysis, ranitidine and NDMA issue was done. So that's what I've uh, shown you here. So the first thing is your pre-submission submission. So what this shows is that we need stricter guidance. FDA and EMA issued new guidance on nitrosamine testing, and companies must evaluate all products for potential nitrosamine risks. Then ANDA submission requirements. Submissions must include degradation pathway assessments, nitrosamine risk analysis, and validated testing methods like LCMS and MS. So all these guidelines are provided in your ICH, When you read about nitrosamine risk analysis or impurities, you'll understand what all needs to be submitted when you're submitting an ANDA application. And lastly, increased vigilance. So life cycle risk management is integrated into pharmacovigilance to better to better track the adverse effect or any impurities being found. And lastly, the GMP guidelines now mandate impurity detection. Without impurity detection, the site is not getting a GMP certificate as well. So yes, impurity detection is also very important when we're talking about uh, any application approval or drug approval. So these are your case study discussion. The first one is your what procedural checks could have prevented this issue. Okay, so here's a list of procedural checks uh, which could have prevented the ranitidine and NDMA crisis. Okay, read it on your pace for a minute and then I'll discuss. These are the procedural checks to prevent the ranitidine NDMA crisis. The first one is your formulation risk assessment. It requires comprehensive impurity profiling and degradation pathway studies during NDA and ANDA submission and manufacturing changes. So, when you'll go back and see the ICH module, ICH M4Q R1, you'll see that there's a section where we talk about impurities and degradation pathways. Okay, so all the data related to needs to be submitted to assess the formulation risk. Then stability testing protocols. You need to conduct forced degradation and long-term stability studies under varied conditions, including high temperature and humidity, and need to submit the data collected from that long-term study in the ANDA or NDA application. Then pre-market evaluation to we can use predictive toxicology models and analytical methods to flag nitrosamine formation risks early. Next is your data submission validation, where you can enforce strict validation and cross verification of impurity testing data. And last is a periodic regulatory reassessment, which establish life cycle review cycles to assess older drugs with new scientific knowledge. Okay, moving on with the next question. How should regulatory authorities evolve for legacy molecule? So these are the evolution areas. The first one is your risk based reevaluation. Risk-based reevaluation, which in which we can implement structured re-review programs for legacy approved approvals based on evolving scientific risk. Then another evolution area could be enhanced post-approval vigilance, which require periodic submission of real-world evidence, quality trends, and updated risk assessments. Then adaptive regulations could be one evolution area where you can introduce conditional renewals requiring periodic safety reaffirmation that yes, the medicine is safe for use, especially for high volume generics. Because when you are manufacturing and marketing high volume generics, there can be an oversight. So we need to make sure that that oversight is not done and we are submitting the actual and the right data to the regulatory body for review. Then we can talk about global harmonization, which is another evolution area, which will align regulatory frameworks internationally under initiatives like ICH M7 for mutagenic impurities, if there's any. And lastly, digital infrastructure, which will improve database and automation for early signal detection of batch failures and impurity trends. This is where your AI comes in action. So, yes, if there's improved database, you can use your AI models to detect if there can be any batch failure or if there is any impurity trend that can be noticed in the long run. So that can be done to, that can be done by regulatory authorities for legacy molecules. Okay, the next question that arises is, should post market surveillance be mandatory for generics? Yes, post market surveillance for all the medicines should be mandatory, because at the end of the day, it's medicine that we're talking about and it cannot have any adverse effect that should go unnoticed. Okay, so the first thing why it's important is because quality can drift over time. Changes in suppliers, excipients, or processes may introduce impurities or inconsistencies without detection. So, post market surveillance is very important for generics. Second is your global manufacturing spread. APIs are sourced globally, face varying regional standards requiring vigilant oversight. Okay, so we need to make sure that the oversight is not done, vigilance is maintained, and therefore post market surveillance is very important. Next is your cost pressure versus safety. So the cost sensitivity in generics can risk testing and compromises unless mandated by regulation. So, because generics are supposed to be cost effective, we cannot put in a lot of money to for post market surveillance. But if there is a regulation in place that yes, the drug needs to be undergo post market surveillance, then it does not matter how much money is being invested in the generics, but it needs to be done to make sure that the drug is effective. Then patient safety and global precedent. Any minor quality lapses which impact millions, EMA and FDA enforce post-approval monitoring and impurity tracking. So any minor quality lapses, FDA and EMA make sure that the impurity tracking is done and monitored for that drug. Okay, so these are implementations. These are just suggestive implementations which include mandatory annual post-marketing quality reports or risk management plans for critical generics. So all of these things need to be in place to make sure that there is no regulatory oversight and the data that will be submitted or has been submitted meets the regulatory requirement or the quality and safety requirements to be marketed and administered to the patient. Okay. Now, what are the responsibilities of the marketing authorization holder? Who are marketing authorization holder? Marketing authorization holders are the people or the companies who hold the authorization to market a particular drug. For example, there is a company A who is the marketing authorization holder, does not mean it is also the manufacturer of the product. The manufacturer can be B or C site, but MAH could still be the A site and not the BC. Okay, so yes, marketing authorization is somebody who holds the product license or is the product license holder of that medicine. And it can be a manufacturer, it cannot be a manufacturer because there can always be a third party manufacturer who is manufacturing the drug for the product license holder. Okay, so yes, what are the responsibilities of the marketing authorization holder? First thing, quality assurance. MAH maintains ongoing GMP compliance across all manufacturing sites, including outsourced ones. So, take for example a product called Lipenthil. Lipenthil is your product which consists of fenofibrate as an API. It's been manufactured in Germany at XYZ site, and the same site is also the MAH of the product. Okay. Uh, I'll repeat that again for you. There's a product called Lipenthil, uh, whose product license holder or MAH is a company called X in a country like Germany. Okay. Uh, it's also the manufacturer. It is producing it's the bulk manufacturer of the drug, okay, of the API, and also the MAH holder. But it can also have other manufacturing size which are the third party manufacturer. For example, the API is being manufactured at the MAH side, but it is being packed, it is released, the batch release is happening at a different site. So all those site needs to be GMP compliant, and MAH needs to make sure that it is GMP compliant. So that is the first area of responsibility for an MAH, to make sure of the quality assurance. Second is your impurity monitoring. If the MAH itself is not checking for the impurity, and if it is outsourcing to a different company or a manufacturer, then the regularly test for new and emerging impurity needs to be done by the testing facility, especially those flagged in public health advisories. And the data needs to be submitted to the MAH by the testing facility and the MAH to the regulatory body. Then third is your product lifecycle management. Proactively update dossiers to reflect manufacturing changes, new data, or updated testing methods. For example, recently during the Brexit, there was a law which mandates that the product being sold in Ireland and UK needs to reflect UK only uh, on the product that's been marketed there. Okay, for example, the packaging needs to mention that it can be only sold in UK. So companies there need to write UK only on their packaging. So that was a change that came after Brexit. So uh, that needed to be reflected in the dossiers. So MAH made sure that the dossiers were proactively updated to reflect the manufacturing changes, any new data, or updated testing methods. Then is your pharmacovigilance and surveillance, uh, where MAH responsibility includes monitoring adverse event trends and report quality related complaints to authorities promptly. Then comes your regulatory reporting, where MAH ensures timely, accurate communication with regulatory during any recalls, quality issues, or label updates. And the last is ethical obligation, where MAH prioritizes patient safety beyond legal compliance as a non negotiable duty. Okay, so patient compliance, patient safety is of top priority beyond any legal compliance, and is a non-negotiable duty, and it needs to be made sure by the MAH. Okay, so that was about a regulatory failure, uh, ranitidine withdrawal from the market, and how it happened, why it happened, and what we learned from it. Now is your regulatory enforcement, where we will talk about FDA Form 483, warning letters, and recalls in depth. So, all these forms and letters are being updated on FDA's website uh, when and where the update is necessary. So, you can check the FDA's website for an example of FDA Form 483. I'll quickly show it to you. I have one in my system. Uh-huh. I hope my screen is visible to everyone. So this is how an FDA Form 483 looks like, where all the data related to inspectional observation is maintained. So you can see for biologics, for biosearch monitoring, devices, medical devices, drugs, food, human tissues. All the data is being submitted here. If you go to the FDA's website, you will easily find it. So veterinary medicine, radioactive health, parts 1240 and 1250, human tissues. All the data is being provided here as a inspectional observation. Okay. So this is your form 483. Now let's talk about it in detail. Okay, so coming back to regulatory enforcement, FDA Form 483 recalls and letters. Okay, if you have any questions so far related to emergency use authorization, any related to the failure of ranitidine withdrawal that we talked about, uh, if you have any questions related to the MAH or what other why post-market surveillance is important, if there are any questions, please you can ask them in the chat box and we can discuss that because I feel for the new topic for the FDA warning letters, we should take it up in the next class because it's going to be an extensive topic. So we can take that up in the next class. So far, if you have any questions, you can ask them, and then we'll wrap up this session for today. And we'll start with FDA Form 483 and warning letters in the next class.